So hello everybody. Thank you for being here today. We are still waiting for our live participants, and I think you just can take 1 or 2 or 3 minutes to make a cup of tea, do something you might want to do at the moment till the participants come online here. I'm very sorry that we are a bit in delay, but nonetheless, we will have our session today and we will speak on eating disorders, such as bulimia, such as binge eating, and all those topics which are not easy to talk about and have a lot to do with self-punishment. So just take my excuse for the moment and we will be back in 5 minutes. Hi Neil, we are live at the moment.
Yes, Barbara will be on very shortly. So.
Very good. So we start greeting our participants and very happy to have this talk today on eating disorders.
Yep.
And self-punishment. For me, it always was a lot of self-punishment involved in there. Of course, knowing my childhood, it was survival. And I had this, how is it called in the English language when you starve and don't eat?
Do you mean starving or do you mean fasting?
No, I mean when you really starve, when you not really fasting is with an intention to clean the body and so on. But there's
Yeah.
this self-punishment, not eating. What is this called in English?
Well, anorexia is the disease,
Yeah.
and anorexia, and that's where people are, just having to be not
Okay.
eating all for a whole range of reasons. It's a big psychiatric condition. Um, but tell me, Marianne, we'll get some more information about bulimia and that type of thing once Barbara comes on. But in the case of your own situation with your family and that type of thing, was there like epigenetic stuff that you could recognize around eating? Was there
Mm,
familial?
not really, not at binge eating, maybe, and the history of extremely good cooks in the family. So eating always was a major topic. This might sit in the epigenetic, but for me, the anorectic issue was all about to strengthen my will to be capable to fight my father.
Okay,
So it was,
so
if I can manage to not eat, then I can manage to stand against my father. It was only about willpower, exercise on willpower.
okay, so that's a very interesting thing that you're talking about there, is that the eating disorder is really just a tool to get another outcome altogether. How common do you think that is with people, that they are using eating disorders as a way of, well, obviously there's a lot of self-punishment in it, but, to what extent do you think people are attempting to manipulate others by their behavior?
90 to 200%.
So it's an always case. It's an always case.
I would say so because it's the manipulating victim. You put yourself in the victim position and you just try to get compassion, try to get attention, and try to get people to do something for you, which, of course, in my family um, didn't happen. It was not useful, but at least I could be a victim, and I had compassion for my granny. And yes, manipulation in my case was this: not eating was a lot of gaining strength, gaining willpower, and getting freedom.
Okay. So it's just being tougher almost, isn't it? It's
Yeah, yeah,
trying to get, but it's also being tougher,
yeah.
stronger.
It had to do that time. I did a lot of sports. I was a student in quite any topic. So just to not give any option to my parents to forbid me anything.
Okay.
Because I
So
always could say, if you do that, I might be less good in school.
okay, very interesting manipulative process in there.
Yes,
So what sorry, you go.
I was just thinking about the weekends, the German family weekends, which means you have to go out and to the landscape with the parents and see other friends of the parents and maybe do a trip with the parents, go to somewhere, a place, to a concert or see a church or another famous thing, just cultural education. And I just didn't like that. I didn't like the company. I wanted to be alone. I'm in the autistic spectrum. I need my space. And the topic between me and my father always was that I said, if you don't give me the possibility to study, then I will be bad at school. I need the time to study. If I have to go out with you, I cannot study. When should I study? I'm doing the sports under the week in the week time. And there's so little space for me to really study and learn and to be good. So I have to stay at home and I have to study, can't you see? And my dad knew that I wouldn't study 1 minute being at home, but he knew that I would do bad tests.
Now, this is a real battle. This is a real battle that we're, yeah. But so the you know, like I can just see that type of thing going on for a child. You know, that's you know, trying to outwit the parent and so on. So I get that, but it's a slightly different thing. This business of starving yourself, and it has a different energy to it.
It has the battle energy. You know, my father was very strict, very dictatorial, very highly intelligent engineer, German type, totally strict. And I knew when his BMW drove up the hill, I could hear from the motor whether it would be really dangerous to meet him at the dining table. And when I heard him driving up with a special frequency, I knew I better get into my room and quit eating and say I need to study. So just to get out of the way of that aggression and the battle.
Okay. That's a very remarkable decision, and because of that battle that was already going on about the studying and so on, your father would allow you to miss the meal. He
Yes,
would
of
allow
course.
that. Yeah. Interesting. So if you were at the table, was there always pressure on eating all the food that was prepared, or what was the...
My father was, and my parents were in a very bad situation after the war. My father is born 36 and my mother is born 40. So they had all the pressure of having nothing to eat or very little to eat during the time they grew up. So eating what was on the plate had some meaning to them.
Sure.
They wouldn't really force us, but you knew that you didn't have to spoil with food. That you would have to look what amount you want to eat and put only that on your plate.
Yeah.
So that the rest could be saved for somebody who wants to eat it later.
Mm-hmm.
And that you don't take more than your share from the bigger plates, and yes, that you divide properly in your mind before taking.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting. I you know, in my family, I obviously grew up in the same time frame as you, and you know, my parents had gone through not only the wars, but the Second War, but also the Depression. My dad had in particular, and the you know the loss or the lack of food was a really pronounced and really obvious thing in their lives, and for my dad, it was very important to eat all the food that was on your plate. And very often it would be served for you, so you'd be given a plate of food, and you know, you had to sit there until you ate it. And you know, it had all kinds of green things on it that I didn't like to eat anyway, and so on. So like, it was this whole drama associated with food. So for me, the eating disorder stuff is around the fact that there was all of that violence at the dinner table, and it was, you know, it was very aggressive around, you know, don't waste your food. And you know, the most commonly quoted thing to us was, you know, think of all the starving children in the... And we would think about that, and you know, like, it's a very reasonable thing to be aware of, that we were living in a country and at a time when there was plenty of food and you know, abundance of all sorts, really. You know, when I was growing up in the 60s, and yet the, you know, this energy of it being a trauma, like it was quite traumatic. Food was traumatic for us children. So, you know, if you could describe me as having eating disorders, it would be around, you know, the fear of the violence at the table, fundamentally, you know, would be the thing. But that certainly, I never adapted it in the way that you're talking about towards the anorexic approach. So like it never adapted in that way. And in fact, of course, in my family, fasting was quite normal. And, you know, even as children, we were encouraged, you know, occasionally to do water fast and that type of thing, or even fast without water. While we were growing up, that was the habit that they had. So, yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. And first time I actually experienced somebody with anorexia wasn't until I was at high school. And it was the girls, once they were going through puberty and they were having the hormonal issues and that type of thing, that the experience of the anorexia sort of really kicked in. In fact, a couple of them lost their lives from anorexia amongst my school friends.
That can easily happen. That can easily happen. In my family, the violence was at the table, but it was not addressed to the food. It was directly addressed to the people. So often my father at the table would start a discussion, and if I would endeavor to answer it, there was the only answer: as long as your feet are under my table, you stop talking. And you're not saying anything I don't want to hear.
That's interesting. So he would bait you for that response.
Yeah. So the response, the aggression was never about the eating. It could be any topic, and he was just displeased with his life and his profession. So he was ready to explode on any topic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most common things was that my middle sister, who wasn't that good at school, had to hand over her tests. And if there was a C on it, the trouble was set. And then I started defending my sister, and then I was done.
So what was your route out of this? Like in my own case, taking the violence out of the food. Once I was married and that type of thing, by and large, I was able to become more and more peaceful about dinner time and all that sort of things. So like with my own work on myself and so on, I was able to make that change. And as I say, like it had never actually directed itself in this way of actually denying myself food, for that type of purpose, and certainly never to manipulate another person. But in your case, how did you migrate? How did that migration go for you?
I had it very hard, but once I had my own kitchen, it started to get better. And the best times I always had when I was living alone and had only to care for myself and had the possibility to see, am I hungry now? Or is it a time you should eat? And so I could explore my type of eating. I could explore that I'm more a kapha type. Now I know that usually at 11 o'clock I'm hungry and that this is a good time for me to eat. And that it's probably enough to eat 2 times a day at 11 o'clock, because then I'm really hungry.
So tell people what you mean by a kapha type, what that means.
A kapha type from the Indian dosha, the Ayurvedic doshas, the kapha type. There's a vata type, a pitta type, and a kapha type. And the kapha type usually is like my body is a stronger earthly built body. And yes, we are not so excitable, not so irritable. A kapha type is more content and more centered usually. And with all the trauma I had from my home place, it took long, long time to discover who I really am. And covered up with all these gourmet things in my family, it took a long time for me to realize that I'm the salad eating type, that this is my favorite food. And that I just have to realize that the kapha type has times where it can eat salad and times where this is not possible. That I have to be a bit aware of when I'm going to sleep and when I'm awake and consider these things.
Mm.
And that I should eat roots because naturally I will need a few sweet things. But if I don't want to eat sugar, then I need to eat roots, beetroot or something, which is sweet in itself, or carrots. And then I'm very
Sure.
happy.
So when you've got your own kitchen and so on, like it's easy to see how you would take that experience of or the association. Because what I'm thinking about here is the way in which, for you and for me, food, eating, particularly eating at the table with other people, had violence in it. So there was violence associated with it. And obviously, if you're on your own, then you can choose not to have violence, or you can choose to continue the violence as well. And I'm just interested in, um, was there a conscious attempt at all of these things, or was it happening unconsciously as you were making those changes, or what was happening?
Oh, being not at home anymore was instant relief and a journey of self-exploration. And but I still have trouble if I have to go out dining with other people. It's still or going down to the taverna where many people are and some smoking and some are loud. This is not so easy thing for me.
Okay. So was your dad a smoker?
Yes.
Yeah.
Till
So
he
like
was
there's a
35, he was strong smoker, very strong smoker, even in
okay.
the car.
Yeah. So the association with the violence, with the smell of the cigarette smoke as well, would be there. Hmm.
And
Did you?
alcohol and loudness. He stopped all that. He stopped all his bad habits as he grew older. But of course, I was a little child when he was young.
Mm, mm, mm.
He started smoking when he was, as he stopped smoking when he was 35, and he stopped drinking alcohol when he was 50. Any alcohol. And yeah, and he stopped being aggressive maybe 10 years ago. It got better when he had grandchildren.
Okay, that's interesting. Very interesting.
He was a good grandpa. Wasn't that great as a father, but good grandpa.
Okay.
I could see that. I could observe it, and I could see that this really helped him to transform himself.
So, have you had clients in your health practice? Have you had clients who have been anorexic or bulimic?
Yes, I had not so many bulimic. I had anorectic people, and I had people in vata excess. Those who got allergic to a point where they cannot eat and cannot uptake any form of food anymore. They starve eating.
Mm.
I had a lot of those people on that scale.
So explain how you would approach working with them then, how you would work with them, because they're an interesting case. Yeah.
Oh, the first thing is that I always ask their intention. And then I quite directly ask, you know, I have been anorectic myself. Whom do you want to punish?
Okay.
We had a very clear talk on that.
All right. So you got very, very clear on the punishment aspect. Yeah.
Yeah. And all they needed to get off the anorectic thing was to see that they are punishing themselves and not other persons. That they would go punishing to a form that it gets so addictive that there's a chance to die. And it was just about who profits. And once they see that those whom they want to punish really profit from them losing their lives, they stop.
Yeah, very interesting.
But they have to realize that their form of action does not serve the purpose.
Okay. So if we look at it as a psychosis, you know, which it fundamentally is, it is a strategy, like it's a survival strategy of one sort. But what other, like, are there other sort of conditions or psychological conditions that you can think of which are based on this wanting to punish somebody?
Dominance?
Sure. Yeah.
Very sure dominance. If I want to punish somebody, then I have to know what is right and what is wrong. And I seek the fulfillment of my being right by punishing.
Mm.
And there's nothing to, you can't run away from that truth.
So, like the predominant psychiatric conditions that we think of, you know, schizophrenia or even the ones, you know, depression and anxiety, mania, those sorts of things, bipolar conditions, none of them would be traditionally viewed and along the lines of a punishment strategy. You know, like that's something that's being utilized in that form. That would be, I've never heard of anybody talk about it, about those conditions in that way. You know, certainly a dominant driver like dominance, you know, something like that would be an obvious way in which that works. But this anorexia is seen, well, and, you know, the self-harm, the things that lead to suicide and that type of thing are all about punishing somebody.
Yes, I can only talk for myself because this is the only person I really know. But I have had the notion in my clients that it is the same for them. That I thought I had the right to be loved by my parents. That I, the same as my sisters, had the right to be loved, and I just didn't do. They couldn't. So I started to punish them by harming my life. And somehow try to get stronger and prove myself invulnerable by not eating. All kinds of psychosis.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
weird ideas, weird ideas. But the main issue, at least in myself, is that I thought I had the right to be loved.
Is there a relationship between this and the fibromyalgia, do you think? Is there a tie up there?
Don't think so. Not that I could see this very moment. The fibromyalgia was it really did get the set on traumas of very big loss, where I was emotionally attached and did lose people or animals. And I couldn't cope with that loss. You can say that there was a lot of attachment there, that the attachment was going from me to that person or that animal. It needn't have been both ways. One way was enough. And I can say that the major healing of all the eating issue took place when I saw the film about the crying camel. Don't know whether you know that film.
No.
It's some kind of art film coming from one very famous German art school and traditional film regisseur school. This film was about a family in Mongolia who had camels, and one of the camels got a baby. And the birth was so dramatic and traumatic for the mother that it did cast the baby away. And that baby, being a white camel and big camel, was about to die because he didn't get the mother's milk. And the mother had the baby sitting alone in the sandstorm. And it was really very miserable. And one granny of the family tried to get the milk from the mother camel to give it to the baby camel, but the baby camel only reacted with diarrhea and bloody diarrhea and was going to die. And then the granny said, there's nothing to do. Maybe the mother camel would die. Maybe the baby camel is to die, definitely. We need to get the music professor. And then they had the children ride with the camel to the next musical college in the desert. And back came a professor with the horse violin, the horse head violin. This is called in the Tibetan language. And he played to that mother camel till the mother camel cried. And after crying, the mother camel could take the baby, and both survived. And the film was the documentary about that and the knowledge of the grannies. And very, very sadly, my mother didn't have a mother who knew what was to do after the birth. At that time, I did understand what happened.
Okay. Yeah.
And that it was not about me, that it was about my mother not having got the healing she needed. And that dissolved a lot in myself.
Mm.
And from that on, I realized that my mother just cannot love me. It's not because she doesn't want to, she just doesn't have the capability. You can't split a cake you don't have. It's impossible. So from that time, I went on trying to realize love in myself somehow. Doing a lot of meditation, getting on the spiritual journey, and there I found a lot more than in my family. But I would think that this is some kind of journey a lot of anorectic people go. That they have the notion that in their incarnation contract there was signed, you will be loved, but probably they didn't read the small print.
The small print of the contract, eh? It's interesting.
Yeah. And one psychologist whom I appreciated very much in all my career, he said to me, In your contract, there was you will get a body. There was nothing written about that body or you will be loved. Be happy you get a body. This was a time of great realizing in myself. Before that, I thought it is combined. You have a body and you get the body from the mother, and therefore the mother loves you, like in any other animal, usually. I had the view on cats and dogs and how they get on with their babies, how much unconditional love there was. And I didn't have it, and I just couldn't understand it. I searched the papers of my father to see to find the adoption contract because I thought they can love my sisters, they cannot love me. Why? There must be a reason for it. But of course, those papers were not there. And that even got me more angry. Because I thought it is so insane, it is so not right. And it took so many years to understand my mother and my father. Very late in his life, my father told me that he asked my mother why she did marry him. And my mother told him because she was pregnant. And of course, that whole thing, being angry about on my mother, was projected on me as the first child.
Yeah.
All this disappointment and embarrassment, of course, I could understand it. I could understand that not my father as a person was married, but as a function. This is not nice.
Of course, what you're talking about is, in our generation, it was pretty common that people would fall pregnant, women would fall pregnant, and then there would have to be a marriage, following on from it. Today in 2020, there's a lot more liberal approach to these things, and if it's for the best interests of everybody for it to go ahead, then it does. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Or, as you know, there's every kind of misappropriate stuff going on in there as well. But it certainly was, a huge piece there.
Hi, Barbara. So nice to have you here. We were just talking about my former anorectic journey.
Oh, really?
Oh, really? Yes. And how I tried to punish my mother and especially my father by doing that.
Oh, right. Well, I think I just tried to punish myself.
So, what was your journey?
Well, I wasn't brought up I realized I wasn't brought up in a totally hugging, loving family. And what I was valued for seemed to be how pretty I was. And, so that was what I had to work on to be valued and loved. It still didn't make me feel loved, but when I was my mother was very she was always weighing herself, always wanted to lose weight, but never actually did anything about it. But it was like my regular habit was weighing myself every morning, and I wasn't overweight. I was maybe cuddly a little bit, but I guess. And then my mother actually said that she'd made herself vomit because she thought she'd eaten too much. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. And So from then on, I didn't worry about what I ate. I just gave myself 90 minutes from when I started eating until I went up in secret to the toilet and vomited. So, and that continued for like more than 20 years.
Wow.
Like my bulimia. There was no word bulimia when I was like 15. It was just something that, you know, I was just called, you're a greedy little girl.
Mhm.
Just because I needed to fill myself up. This is how I felt. I needed to fill myself up with I know love now, but I didn't know then. I just needed to, and so I just kept trying to fill myself and to eat as much as possible until I couldn't actually eat anymore. And then, so yeah, and it continued, and it was like shameful to me. I was incredibly ashamed that I was doing this and went to great lengths to hide it.
Mm.
And even when I was hitchhiking, like across the world, I would still find a place to go and vomit because I didn't feel cared about. I actually wrote a paper, sort of something which I don't know where it is now. It's called "Don't Never Tell Your daughter she is pretty," because
Mm-hmm.
if that's all the daughter hears, that's what she will believe is valuable about herself. And so it just continued from there, like right through my teens. When I went off to art college, it was then still like vomiting and cooking myself food that was filling and cheap and lots of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel stupid. I just didn't feel loved, I guess. And that was what it was really all about.
Yes.
And
You
and
see,
there was
Neil,
what?
I just said to Neil, you see, Neil, it's the same topic.
It's yeah, it's identical. The topic is absolutely identical. Yeah.
Yes. So eating disorders really probably all of them boil down to not feeling cared for and loved and valued for exactly who you are, whatever shape you are, whatever weight you are. Just it was, and my mother never realized. I mean, nor my dad. And then I went through I took drugs and things like that also because that gave me a feeling of, I don't know, sort of feeling good.
Mm-hmm.
But it was only when I became a mother, like, and after a couple of years, I suddenly found that I was eating more healthily and I just became not bulimic anymore. But maybe if there'd been some sort of therapy for it at that time or understanding what I was going through, but there wasn't. And I was just, according to my family, who sort of knew, I was just a greedy thing. And
Greedy, hysterical, and what words they use. Huh?
yes,
Yes. And you were told you were so pretty and that you have to keep an eye on the weight, or you decided to have an eye on the weight.
yes, yes, yes.
I was told that I am so ugly that nobody ever would love me.
Uh,
Quite each day of my life.
how awful. That is,
I survived it, Barbara. I survived it.
yes, but the thing about it is once you come out on the other side, or maybe when you're still in that bulimic state, you do have an understanding of something that most people don't ever experience. So you can support people who do have eating disorders and actually make them feel a little bit more valuable and worthy, and turn their eyes to look inside themselves, to whatever jewel they have there, and help them to manifest that. You know, I have a lady that I work with, and she hates her body, and I think that it's probably, if you can, people who have eating disorders, usually about one's appearance, I guess. It's maybe time to sort of look at yourself in the mirror without clothes and send love to that body, that beautiful body. So
I told Neil that one psychologist told me in the lot of therapies, one psychologist told me that I didn't properly read the incarnation contract. And that my incarnation contract probably did read, you will get a body, but it didn't read, you will get a body and be loved.
Right.
I just need to get a charger for my phone. I'll be back in 2 seconds.
Yeah. And that was really funny for me, because it was the first time I realized that there could be such a thing, and it could be just natural because parents can't cope.
Right. I think my dad would have been happy to have loved me more visibly, but my mother tended to stand in the way. She was like she was a jealous lady who really hated herself and was very angry. And when my father once stood up to sort of help me do something, which my mother had refused to do, she immediately said, "Come on, we have to go home." You know, it was like it wasn't allowed.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yes, it's often a thing where children get in between parents. And it was the same for myself. I was the firstborn child, and my parents had a very difficult start into their marriage. And so their problems were projected on me. And they fought their battle on my back.
Yeah. I guess it also, similar. My parents had a very volatile and verbally and physically abusive relationship. And my mother was always in tears. There was always this word divorce going around, and I was like really like scared of that. And I became the confidant for my mother and her suffering. So I had to become her friend and her therapist and her supporter and all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. My parents did it likewise. It's only that my father wanted me as therapist and communicator and translator to my mother, and my mother the same. So I was sent in between the parents. Could you please tell your mother? Could you please tell your father? Because they didn't speak to each other anymore. And that was 3 or 4 years old that time.
Gosh, that's a terrible burden to put on your child. And, it's like emotional abuse.
It was definitely. But they didn't know it. It was not by purpose and intentionally doing it. They couldn't help it.
They did their best. And, I can understand that now, and at the time I didn't know that I was being put upon. It was just normal. It was just, I'd get home and listen to my mother talking about my dad and what he's doing. It was just expected. This is what happens. But I did have a good friend. I'm still friends with her. And I used to spend the night with her quite often. And it was a Jewish family and incredibly loving. So I had a sort of a stand-in mum when I went and stayed there. That was lovely.
Yeah, I turned to animals very soon in my life.
You tried to what?
I turned to animals.
Oh, right. You weren't allowed animals, but yes, absolutely.
I was just going to say, Barbara, that we were talking earlier about the energy at the table, at the dinner table. And in my upbringing, it was pretty violent, the energy at the dinner table. And it was largely about, that you had to eat your dinner because of the starving people in the world and all that kind of thing. But it stemmed from the experience of going through the Depression and the war and so on and so forth. So and Marianne was saying much the same thing, is that there was that kind of energy at the table as well. And, there's a feeling for both of us that difficulties around eating, and for it to be a natural, harmonious sort of a thing, had quite a strong connection to violence. I'm just wondering if there was a similar pattern for you, or was it different? No?
Well, my mother did cook dinner, I think once a week. We often just went out to dinner. And I always felt that I had to pick something cheap because I was always under the impression that we were poor. I mean, we weren't poor, but my mother was very, keen on keeping everything clean and neat. And she always said, I hate cooking. And being at the dinner table with her, she always had a sort of pained look on her face as she sort of put food in her mouth. And we did sit down together on Sunday lunchtimes and listen to the radio, which was lovely. But there wasn't really any communication between us as a family. I mean, my two brothers were not that. I mean, they'd also suffered being part of this family, but the dinner table was not really anything that happened for us. It was like I'd get home from school at lunchtime. I have to run round to the butcher's to buy the meat for our lunch and shell the peas and make the pastry. It was always a big rush. Mm-hmm. It was we're always late. But yeah, my dad, he'd say, how's your dinner, Billy? Not so bad. That was a compliment from him, but he was a good man and loving through thick and thin. And I value him very much, and I'm just very sad for my mother because she was a very good pianist, and when she got married, everything fell by the wayside. And all her efforts went on to keeping the house clean. It was just, it was just looking after the house, but not looking after the people in it.
Mm-hmm. It's so interesting because the same for my mother. My mother was an artist and totally broken because she went into marriage and had to care for the children and had to care for the house and had to quit going to the art school and finishing and doing her job. And it was always a tremendous insult in her life, definitely.
Yes.
And she felt that she wasn't given a chance to live a life. She was deprived of really having a life.
Yes. Marriage, for my mum, it's like 21, she got married. and had no idea really how to run a home. My nan helped her, but stopped playing the piano. She also wrote stories and had some published and music, but that all took second place.
Mm-hmm.
And she sort of lost any inclination to continue on the art side of her. It's
same in my mom, and I tried to encourage her since I was a little child. And she
yes,
restarted painting when I was about 10 years old, and I did go with her through all her paintings and the colors she did take, and we discussed, but she couldn't stand a position against my father. She couldn't take her space and her place, and it all collapsed again.
yeah.
It's interesting hearing these stories about the mothers and their, perhaps their natures not really being able to be fulfilled. And mother was a tremendous intellect. She was an amazing intellect. And as I suppose, teenager, as the war was running, so she late teenager perhaps, as the war was running, she got a job in an accounting practice. And the main accountants had all gone off to fight in the war. And so she was left there herself. I don't know however many other people were there in the practice, but she went all the way, all right near to the end of actually becoming a chartered accountant. By the time, she then got married, and then everything's off. So it's all finished. And I don't feel that she had these kinds of distraught experiences that you're talking about. But I often used to think, Mum, why don't you finish off? Get your accounting degree through, and she would just laugh at me. She said, "Well, what would be the point? There's absolutely no point." But it just seems to have been a huge generational, perhaps generations and generations of women who have, been unfulfilled in what they might have otherwise have done.
Well, when I grew up, girls didn't go to university, and girls probably got a job as a secretary and then got married and became a wonderful housewife and mother. I mean, that was the roots. But, my mum and my dad lived through the Second World War, make, do and mend. Everything was like, you had to be thrifty. And I don't know, I think my mother had some sort of mental condition, but she never made friends when she was at school. Her sister made friends, but my mum didn't make friends. And we lived in like a semi-detached house, quite a nice street. She never spoke to the neighbors. She never had friends that she could talk to, unload to, or gossip with. There were never any friends. So I was obviously her friend because she didn't have anyone else. But I don't know. People liked her when they actually got to meet her. And she could be very kind, but she didn't know how to connect with anyone. She didn't. I don't know why, but because my nan, her mum, was lovely, loved everybody and supported everybody, and was fun. So, but then they went through the First World War, so and all the wartime and the disconnection. I mean, my dad didn't go off and fight. He had a desk job, but he also had a jazz band in the 30s. So, that's sort of how they met. He was the band leader and she became his singer. So they have, they had a good connection, but somehow then the war came, and he lost most of his band people to the war, and he had to start working. So, and he worked. He worked really hard and gambled. He loved playing on the roulette table.
Okay.
That was
That's so good for the money.
He was always trying to make some money, but whenever he did, he put it back on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's my number, 29. You were talking to me. I missed it. It's your fault. But yeah.
While I'm hearing you both talking about your experiences and the experiences of your mothers, I'm thinking about that conversation we had well over a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, about the sequence of pollution, radiation pollution that's gone on. And you're both talking about how wonderful your nans were, your grannies, and there were those generations of wonderful women in your memory of them, and then your mothers are struggling. And I'm just wondering whether there is some timing type of connection into what was happening on radiation shifts. Wonder, like that there's some kind of pressure that's going on.
Well, these days people don't have much of a connection. A lot of people, they're not connected to their grandparents anymore because they live in a different country or a different city, or no one's got time to visit. I mean, driving to see my uncle and his family was a lovely afternoon on the farm, but people are too busy on their devices or too far to go, and the children miss out on that really valuable family connection. And seeing that your parents are not the only way to live a family life. This is your grandparents. Look how they live and what they spend time on. I mean, and education these days is just complete rubbish, generally, if you follow the curriculums that you're supposed to follow. It doesn't teach children to look at the stars or just, okay, this is your 10 minutes daydreaming time, everyone. I mean, we could do that here in Bali. When I came to Bali and taught here, we could, massage the requirements and make it more wonderful for the kids. But in the West or, Australia or somewhere, I think you have to do this, you have to do that. I found teaching in England was really, really stressful.
Yeah.
But teaching in Bali was wonderful.
I can imagine. For me, school always was a prison. And being at home was worse than a prison. So the only thing left was going for sports and meet people there.
Yeah. Oh, we all have a story, don't we? Even those, I'm sure even those who are doing fine and making lots of money and doing it, sure, it's not all easy. But it's probably easier for some than for others, I don't know. I didn't really start to make the life that I dreamed of until I left England. And because that was not the place for me. And it was the most terrifying thing I've ever done, is actually leaving England and going to somewhere that a third world country that, it was, but the best thing I've ever done.
Interesting, because it's the same for me. Leaving Germany and Austria and going to Greece, which is not a third world country, but one of the most broken European countries. That was it.
Scary?
The best what I ever could do, but I was scared to my bones. I was frozen. I talked to Neil. Can I do it? Can't I do it? Can you imagine me walking on the beach in Greece? And he said, yes, you can do it.
No.
And yes, this is one of the things why I came here in 2017. And finally did the step I always dreamed of, living somewhere near the sea, see the sunset every evening over the sea.
Yeah. Of course, there was that phone call I had when I was away from home at art college, and this good friend of mine, Richard, I was with my parents. It was summer holidays, and I got this phone call. Barbara, it's for you. Hello. Do you want to come to Arabia with me next week? So I might have mentioned this, but I said, I'll call you back. And he had actually planned a trip through overland to Petra in Jordan.
Mm-hmm.
I phoned him back and I said, yes. And so we got visas, and it was supposed to be a trip on a scooter.
Mm-hmm.
And the scooter gave out, like in where was it? Not Turkey. It was, well, anyway, not far along the road. And so we hitchhiked, which was wonderful. And I mean, this was so wonderful.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so doing things which are outside of your comfort zone, they're outside of the box for you, is interesting, isn't it? And it's interesting what it throws up for you. So yeah, it's like, I don't know of anybody else who's taken quite the adventure that you did, Barbara. You know, just the two of you. So you know.
Oh
also,
yes, wonderful.
Really.
Well, you know, I grew up with this painting of like a tropical island on the wall, and so I think it was already in my plan, if I didn't know it, that I had to go somewhere like, you know, a tropical island. So somehow that's where I am now.
So interesting, Barbara, because when I was a little child, I always went down to the cellar to do a painting, fire and water. On the bottom, water, and up fire. And now that I see the sunsets over the sea, I know what I painted.
Absolutely.
I painted sunsets. So
yes.
I knew that sometime I would see this, or I want to see this again.
Right, you see that painting on the wall
yes,
behind?
I see.
That is one that I found in the supermarket there. And it's very like the one that was hanging on the wall from when I was about 7 until I left home, until I was 18. But it was huge. You know, my mother had bought it, and she also loved the sea, but never let herself go there.
It's interesting because maybe there's a certain program that you want to follow, and maybe I have a notion that we selected these parents who would finally give us the power to get out of the box.
Yeah, because my brothers are still in home county. I mean, I was the black sheep, thank goodness.
Yeah, I'm the black sheep too, Barbara. And my two sisters are still in Bavaria.
Isn't it weird? There's always one that is sainted or, you know, blessed.
Sainted or cursed or blessed, whatever.
Yes, yes, yes.
But one who has really a story and is going, definitely leaving.
And learning so many new things after arriving in, you know, this side of the world. Actually starting ballet classes when I was about like in my later 50s, which is something I'd always wanted to do, and other things like I could do them here. I didn't feel, I don't know, held back or something. I could just go and be a very, very, very beginner.
And why not?
Exactly. You know, people will say, I'm too old. No, you're not.
Oh dear. Well, I'm still trying to work out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Yeah, yeah. Probably have a tiger.
Still haven't worked it out.
It's so interesting.
Yes, yes.
And it all started with anorexia or bulimia as a reaction of the notion that we were not loved by our parents who still did the best they could that time.
Yes. But it meant there was this huge vacuum hole inside you. You might that I didn't even realize it was there, but I was trying to fill it with food.
Trying to nourish yourself somehow by confusing food with love. It's the same in me. So
But
confusing.
harming yourself as well. And but you were anorexic.
I have been anorexic, and then because that didn't work properly, I went to binge eating.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. It's just fascinating.
Food is so important. I remember long ago there was this thing, you are what you eat. When it was first said, everybody thought that was silly. But you are what you eat, and where you eat, and how you eat, and you. I mean, people don't give their meal times time anymore. It's all like, you know, fast food, eating on the go, quick lunch. What about a long lunch? Or like sort of, we need to get people eating and tasting and chewing and enjoying and sharing, all of those things. And it's all around food. When I was like traveling like in Pakistan and the food was ready, okay, the ladies were in the kitchen eating, but we all sat around this one big pan on the floor, eating with our fingers. It was just a community of enjoyment.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, the East, don't look on them as backward. They're flipping forward.
It's a different kind of eating, but it has that in it which we missed, the appreciation and the love.
Yes, that's right.
And till now, I can taste when somebody cooks food, in which emotion that food is cooked.
Totally. Let me
Oh,
just share this. When I went for a coffee the other day, the barista, it's a place that always makes really good coffee, but it was a different barista. And I could see he was like not happy. And I couldn't drink the coffee he made. It was full of sadness and loneliness. It really was. It tasted not pleasant.
mm-hmm.
And okay, I got to make another one, different barista. That was fine. But it's like
It is
you need
so.
to put love into your cooking and whatever.
Mm-hmm. And It's a strong taste if somebody doesn't. It's a strong taste for me.
Yes, yes.
Isn't that interesting, Neil? Maybe we are hitting the point of anorexia and bulimia because our mothers, they didn't have love. They couldn't cook in it.
That's right.
They didn't have it.
My mum hated cooking anyway, so it was
No,
all like,
mine too, mine too.
but when I ate at my friend's, the Jewish family, it was always really, really tough.
And so was my granny's food. Very tasty.
Yes, mine too. So maybe that's the new ingredient that we have to get people to look at. Most important.
So this is for people who watch and for binge eaters as well as anorectic or bulimic people or clinics that we try to do a different approach in therapy, that we really take an eye on that the one who cooks the meal for those people has the ability to cook love in it. And then we see whether they still want to be bulimic, anorectic, or binge eating.
I was just hearing from my brother in England how many people in nursing homes have died of the virus, but the thing is, they're not getting any love. Everyone's got masks, no touch. So,
no touch.
And probably fear when they're preparing the food. Of course, they're dying. Their immune system is so totally trashed because of the withdrawal of this caring, this fear.
This is really worth a test, I think.
Oh, yes.
So the thing you're talking about there is to have love. So like that's the outcome. What the experience that you had was that it was anger and sadness were the dominant types of emotions that were going into the food, do you think, when you were growing up?
Frustration.
Both of you, yeah.
Frustration from my mother's side.
Yeah, frustration.
Irritability, and a lot of fear.
Yeah, I think it was definitely frustration and loads of anger as I was growing up. I don't think there was fear. But...
Was your mum sad, Barbara? Was she sad as well? Like, was that energy sitting underneath the anger?
Probably, but it was so masked by I think the only time she cried was when I was like getting her to read something from the Bible, because I'd recently at that time become like a born again Christian. And I was trying to let her see how much she was loved and cared for. And, it's from like something in Isaiah, I believe. And that made her cry. Because obviously she couldn't love herself.
Mm-hmm. Same in my mother.
Yeah.
Well, we've definitely got an experiment, okay. We've got an experiment to go here, haven't we? And it's the experiment is firstly identify how much fear and anger is actually going on for the person doing the cooking. And then to encourage conditions which will allow the natural love which is in the person, because everybody actually can express love if they're given the chance, or if they give themselves a chance. So if the environment is tweaked sufficiently so that they can fall back on their natural state of love for the people and love for the food, we can see what happens. So there's two steps, isn't it? One is to we'll carry out a survey and actually identify, what are the dominant emotions that are going on during cooking, and then we'll look at this, the strategies that can be employed. That's a worthy thing for us to do, for sure.
Absolutely.
And maybe just in an anorectic center, try to make a really loving and caring granny do the cooking.
Yes. Oh yeah, that gives me goosebumps. You just saying that. Yeah.
Certainly feels very coherent to me. notion of it.
Yes, absolutely.
Very interesting talk today to me. Guess it's some of the missing pieces of my life, and thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marianne.
Enlightening and uplifting.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you. Well, I you know, feel as though we've really covered this off. So, any questions there, Marianne?
No, I'm
Question.
feeling good.
Okay.
I'm so glad, Barbara, that we talked about that today and that I could see the other side.
Yes, yes. And thank God you went to Greece.
And you to Bali.
Yes, yes.
Well, then, thank you very much, both of you, and we'll meet again soon.
Yes,
we
till
will.
next time.
Okay. Bye. Bye, you guys. Lots
Bye.
of love.